Okay, I've unmuted. Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to George's talk. Thank you, colleagues. You are joining us in St George's Church, live from the East End of London, Whitechapel. This historic building, grade 2 listed. That means no one can touch it, pull it down. It's safe. 1762 is the date of this building, and it has hardly changed since that time. We hold monthly tours in this splendid place. I'm speaking now to a smallish audience in the church and a much larger one live on Zoom. Our talk this evening is to be given by our former organist, Mr. Philip Norman, who has come all the way from Wales, from a village outside Abergavenny, Llandewi Rhydwch, the name of the village. And Philip is going to talk to us on the subject of Johann Sebastian Bach and the Lutheran Church. This church, George's, being a Lutheran church. So, Philip, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you now.
Now, first of all, I'm drowning technology here. So, tells me that I'm going to tell me I've got that, I understand that. Obviously, what I can see on my screen at the moment is not what I'm hoping to see, so I will do that. You have got the same screen as me. You can hear me here who are in present. Anybody out there, is there any way you can indicate whether you can hear me? They can, you can hear me. Okay. J.S. Bach and the Lutheran Church. And the basis for this talk has been described there by Rick. Oh, just before I carry on, I'll point out, apart from drowning in technology, I'm drowning in old age. So many pairs of glasses, try to see what I'm doing at each particular stage. And obviously that's not the right pair. First of all, I'm going to trot through very quickly who Martin Luther was and who Bach was, because there's some people who won't have the background. Those of you who are German Lutherans know quite a bit. Some of you who are out there who are watching this on the internet might not have the same background, so I'm going to just briefly sketch out their lives. This is the first part, seeing where this bit of technology works. There's Martin Luther. You're not seeing the screen, it hasn't. Right, I'll try again. Okay, I'll go back a stage. How's that? Excellent. So I think I've gone right back to the beginning of the talk. Yes, it's up there, Bach and the Lutheran Church. And if I can persuade this to move on, because it's been going through various. First of all, Martin Luther, who's born in 1483 and the progenitor of the Reformation, is about 200 years older than Bach. And I'll just point out a few boring details, a few facts. Born in Eisleben in 1483, which is 200 years before Bach, he went to Latin schools in Mansfield and Magdeburg, where he studied grammar, rhetoric, theology, and according to him, it was purgatory and hell at school. Then at 1501, he went on to University of Erfurt, which he described as the beer house and the whorehouse, and he studied philosophy and also theology, and he found the philosophy very unsatisfying. But in 1505, he took his master's degree, and also he was nearly struck by a thunderbolt, so he decided to become a monk. Now, I'm just going to move past what my screen is showing, because I can't see everything. I'm one presenter view, and that still means I can't see everything. I'll put that back up there then. Well, we'll cope as best we can. Anyway, so we've got to 1505. He's got his master's degree, riding back to university, almost struck by lightning. He decides to become a monk, or vows to become a monk. It's St. Augustine's monastery, there's a picture of it in Erfurt, where he sinks into a period of introspection, as it was described. I think we can call depression, because of this tremendous change of lifestyle. So he's ordered to return to academic studies. So in 1507, he's ordained. In 1508, he's teaching theology at Wittenberg University, gets more degrees through the next few years. 1512, he becomes a doctor of theology. And I've got to manipulate my screen a little bit here. But then in 1516, Johann Tetzel is sent to Germany by the Pope to sell indulgences to raise money to pay for the repairs of St. Peter's Road. And indulgences, for those who aren't used to the sort of Catholic philosophy, you pay money to save your sins now, or to get people who are already, of your relatives, already died, out of purgatory. And he objected to this practice and others. And his 95 theses, which he probably didn't nail to the door, which we saw earlier, were sent to Bishop Albrecht about these abuses. Backwards and forwards, discussion, argy-bargy, disagreement. 1520, he's excommunicated. The rest is history. And I'll go back one stage. You can see that picture of Luther there. He was a very musical person. He loved music himself. You can see Luther playing the lute. I'm just going to see what sort of cursor I can bring up for you. There's his wife. There's 5 of the children. He had 6 children in total, one of which died in infancy, one at 13. Anybody want to guess who this gentleman is? Exactly right, Philip Melanchthon, who was the sort of intellectual architect of the Reformation. Luther fired off ideas all over the place, but Philip Melanchthon, he sort of made it much more rigorous and much more understandable. So that sums up about Luther. Bach and Lutheranism. This is a very famous picture of Bach playing the organ. And I'm just going to quickly go off-piste slightly by bringing up that close-up of his keyboard. And if those of you who play the piano, you see it's just got a random collection of black notes and white notes. It's nothing like reality. And so it proves that you cannot rely entirely upon contemporary pictures or non-contemporary pictures to produce evidence about musical practices. Anyway, Bach and his Lutheran connections. It says from 1694, Latin and Greek, you can read all that. You don't need me to read it for you. That would be bad practice for PowerPoint presentation. I put 1717 Concertmeister Curtain in, not because that has anything to do with the Lutheran connection, but if I didn't put it in, it would be a gap in the CV. No CV should have gaps in them at all. But everything else, his education, his first jobs, his middle jobs, his later jobs, were all connected with the Lutheran Church. We're going to look at Luther and the Mass. And here you can see a picture of allegedly of a Lutheran Mass in Brandenburg around about 1539. And the thing you'll notice is how Catholic it looks. Here we are, 22 years after the Reformation. You've got a priest in a coat, priests in chasubles, a very richly decorated altar, a reredos. It's still looking very Catholic because Luther wasn't going out of his way to discard Catholic practices. He just wanted to reform the church and get rid of the abuses. Sorry? There's a censor there, yeah? Nothing against a bit of incense, is there? And through the chat, I forgot one thing to say, so I'm going back one slide to that. And I've got to read these notes here, because this is what Luther said about his ideal masses. They should all be brief so that everything may be completed in an hour. For one must not overload the soul so they become weary and bored. And he described the Catholic Mass as ass's labour. It's best that divine service should be arranged with an eye to the young and those simple folk that may perhaps come to it. But we must read, sing, preach, write, compose, and if in any wise we can help to promote the interests of the Mass, we should hear bells pealing and organs playing and make as much noise as possible. On taking a side step at the moment, this is the first time I've given this talk. The chances of me getting it finished in 60 minutes are remote. I hope to be done in 70. Right, so the typical Mass, the Catholic Mass of the time, had these musical elements. The introit, which was a chant sung by the choir or monks, suitable today, Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy, Gloria in excelsis, glory to God on high, a gradual, a bit of a psalm, an Alleluia if it's the right season, the Creed, which is the belief, the Sanctus and Benedictus, round about the time of consecration, Agnus Dei, O Lamb of God, a prayer for mercy, the actual communion, which is another piece of psalm, and Ite Missa Est, which is a fancy way of saying, go home, it's all over. And if I use any term at the moment, which isn't clear to you, just put your hand up and I'll explain it. Well, the first outing of any changes to the Mass that we had from Luther was the Formula Messa. And it is Formula Messa a Communionis pro Ecclesia Wittenbergensi by Martin Luteri, and a plan for the Mass and Communion for the Church in Wittenberg by Martin Luther. It might be interesting to notice, it wasn't long after printing was invented, and you can see there, they obviously ran out of a capital W. They put a capital V and a small u. And the next thing he came out with, just in 1526, was the German Mass. The German Mass. Deutsche Messe und Ordnung Gottesdienst zu Wittenberg. German Mass and order of worship at Wittenberg. The thing I'm particularly showing in a few moments is that like the German Mass, there's still lots of singing in it. And you can see here, you're only lucky if it changes. Yes, he has got the instructions how to sing the prayers, how to sing the readings. We sometimes think of Lutheran music as being all hymn-based, but he still wanted the old Catholic practice of singing the liturgy to happen. He wanted the epistles, gospels, and other readings to be sung. But then you can see there, you have got, it goes down to the bottom, it gives examples of how to sing these in German. And what sort of things would he have had in the Mass by now? When he was hoping that you could introduce German hymns. That is, the hymns that everybody could sing. So although he wasn't opposed to Latin and wasn't opposed to sort of other languages we'll come to, he still wanted a lot of German to be possible in the service so that people could understand. And also he wanted them to be able to sing the various bits of text in the German language. So you can see just here, that's Deutsch Sanctus, the German Sanctus. And this is the Sanctus in metrical form to hymn-type melody. You may have noticed the words weren't exactly the same on that clip, what you can see up there. It's very hard on YouTube to find congregations singing exactly the 16th century words you want. You have to go for something close. It demonstrates the sort of thing being sung by the congregation, the parts of the ordinary, the bits of the Mass which occur every week. And if there was a choir present, they may very well sing a chorale arrangement by Johann Walter, who cooperated very much with Luther in organising the music. And it's something like this. And you notice those of you who listen to 16th century music, apart from the German text, it sounds very like Palestrina. So what was a typical-ish Lutheran Mass constructed like? Just going to check, it's come up on the screen, good, yes. A spiritual song or psalm sung in German. You can read that all through for yourself. You notice you've got Kyrie eleison still in Greek. And it goes on to Allein Gott, which is the metrical, the German version of the Gloria. And you can read that through for yourselves. You'll notice here, you've got the Creed sung in German. But apart from that, and the Sanctus here sung in German, not a lot of hymn singing. But you remember Luther was trying to keep possibly down to the hour so that people didn't get bored. Now we're going to have a look at what Bach was doing some 2 centuries later with the Mass. And there's a picture. This is the Thomas Church in Leipzig. And here's the St. Thomas School where the pupils lodge, those who won scholarships for music, and where Bach lived with his numerous children. So it's all in that close-packed area. And this Mass, the first Sunday in Advent, 1723. This was Bach's first year as Cantor of Leipzig. And they had a rather elaborate service for the first Sunday of Advent, and he noted down what took place. They were going to sing the cantata, that's the orchestral and choral piece in the middle, to Nun kommt der Kaiden Heiland, Bach had written earlier, but he wrote down these notes in the margin so he knew what order they were going to come, so he didn't get lost. And you see, it starts with organ, a motet, we'll be coming back to those motets later, organ prelude to the Kyrie, and so on and so forth. You notice there's quite a lot of organ playing in it. And the thing that I've questioned there, organ prelude to Gloria and Allein Gott. But normally the Gloria isn't sung in Advent. It seems, according to Bach's notes, it did. Anything noticeable there, hymn with an organ prelude, we come to that sort of thing there. Gospel, the cantata, and with an organ prelude, and the organ prelude to the cantata was so the organist had to extemporize in the same key the cantata started, and the orchestra used that opportunity to tune up. We didn't have a congregation sitting there where they were sort of doing all that squeaky tuning up noise. The organ was playing, hopefully not too far afield in key, so that the orchestra got lost. You see the Creed once again, possibly with an organ prelude, but it's got very much a similar sort of structure to that Lutheran Mass we looked at earlier. But it wasn't uncommon for the Kyrie and Gloria to be sung, as it said there, Kyrie performed in ensemble. That means it was performed by the choir and the orchestra. It would have sounded something like this. Takes them a long time to get going, doesn't it? And it says up there, this session of the Kyrie and Gloria took 26 minutes. So we're just about 3 lines or 4 lines into that list of the Mass there. And although that particular setting was composed 15 years later, it's not atypical of the time that to get through the Kyrie and the Gloria could take quite a long time. So the idea of getting through a Mass in 1 hour, as Luther would have liked, has long since gone. Lutheran Masses by Bach time could be 4-hour behemoths. And that's just an ordinary Advent Sunday. Now, here's a real service. The bicentennial, the Augsburg's Confession. The Augsburg's Confession, and I'm summing this up in layman's terms, is when all those wild ideas of what Lutheranism was and the Reformation about were really concretely set down, so there was some sort of agreement, and people would sort of swear that they would obey the rules or their allegiance to the Augsburg's Confession. And the 200th anniversary came in Leipzig on the 26th of June. And there you can see what the music consisted of. That wasn't going to be done in an hour. One or two interesting things. The motet, you see I put the T in brackets because no matter how, I'm not a German speaker. I gave up my German studies probably 60 years ago nearly. And wherever I looked on the internet, I couldn't find whether it should be Lorber den Herren or Lorwitz den Herren, and both versions occurred. Imo. Differently. Okay, right. So 2 different things. The main thing is, it says a motet from Floresium Potenza. The choristers of St. Thomas's Church, they had a book of Renaissance motets from 4 parts to 8 parts, which they just went round and round and round. They sort of sang them again, and they were standard parts of the repertoire, and they kept using until they fell apart, and they bought new sets. And they will come back to those a little bit later on. That was part and parcel of their repertoire. You see, Kyrie and Gloria to music. That means that's orchestral accompaniment. So you've got possibly half an hour, 25 minutes or half an hour of Kyrie and Gloria. Then, having sung the Gloria to Latin, they sang it to German as a service. And you can read on through that. The cantata, I've got to change my glasses here. Please bear with me. Gott man lobet dich in der Stille. The music to this is lost. But he used the same music 2 months later for a cantata which was to initiate the town council, and a few years later again for a wedding cantata. So the cantata sounded like this. The main thing we can see, there's no way the services with all this music in it was conforming to Luther's idea of services which were sort of relatively restricted. I don't think we can blame Bach for that, it's just what was going on at his time. And Bach was not a revolutionary, he was a stroppy personality. And by being a genius, he did things nobody thought of before, but he did set out to have revolutionary thoughts. Luther and language. Now, here's something which Luther wrote when he published his German Mass in 1526, and I've underlined the important parts. The first, in Latin, published later, do not want to set aside. So he's quite happy for Latin Masses to carry on, free to use as they please. Further down, the Mass should be held, there should be singing and reading in 4 languages. German, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew is slightly erroneous. Although he was happy to have German so that uneducated people understand, he wanted the 4 languages, German, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, to be used so that people who were educated maintained their function, their understanding of the language. And here's a page we saw a bit before from his German Mass. And at the top, you can see that starts in German, and suddenly, as though this is the German Mass, and in German, it goes, Quis regulet sunt iste. He's lapsed into Latin. Because these are the instructions about how to sing the various parts of the Mass, just for the priest. Periodos et finis sententiae. So he has latched into Latin without apparently seeing any contradiction, the fact it's the German mass. Then down the bottom, the example is back into German. So he's quite happy to move between the languages. And this example here, this comes from the Neue Leipziger Gesangbuch of 1682, 1.5 centuries later. You can see you've got there a choice of German, in German Gothic script, or Latin. Denn die Hirten ihren Säre und die Engel noch viel mehr. Or Adquem regis ambulabunt, aurum tus miram portabunt. You've got your choice in still going on, whether you're going to use Greek or Latin, and he was not hard and fast about that. And obviously, as this Valepius published this in 1682 in Leipzig, the option was still here. So here's something about Bach's early Latin music. You see the little list there? You'll notice you've got 1723 3 times. He produced quite a bit of Latin music, or some pieces, in his first year in Leipzig. And you notice 2 of them are sanctuses, the one in C major, D major, because the sanctus, the holy, 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 could be sung in Latin with full orchestral accompaniment on high days and holy days and festivals. And obviously he produced 2 for that. And the Magnificat in E flat major, 1720 and then in 33, was for the Vesper service, but it was sung in Latin. What I haven't mentioned later on, I'll put in here. He also, in the 1723 Magnificat, stopped the Latin and put German chorales in every now and again. So it's a very free mixture between language and style. Other composers in Bach's manuscript, you can see the Missa Brevis by Pez and the Missa Brevis by Anon. They are from his Weimar days. He went to Weimar as organist and became concertmeister, and he produced his Missa Brevis. And Missa Brevis means a short mass, not everything, usually just the Kyrie and Gloria. Then in the late 1720s, which is quite well established in Leipzig, the Missa Brevis by Durante. And this is Bach's latest Latin church music. 4 Missa Brevises, or Missa Brevi, or Brevi, I don't know my Latin anymore, in the 1730s, all of them Missa Brevis, Kyrie and Gloria only. And we don't know why he suddenly produced these, but obviously they didn't sort of penetrate deep to his heart, because he just rehashed earlier movements of cantatas. Got to do a Kyrie and Gloria, right? What have I written before where I could adapt the words? So summing up basically, the Missa Brevises, the Latin Missa Brevises of Bach, with the Kyrie and Gloria through orchestral music and soloists and full choir. The Credo is usually sung to the chorale via Glauben all, or sometimes sung to the Latin plain song. The Sanctus, Holy, 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 was only used on high days and holy days, and they didn't put the Benedictus on, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And Agnus Dei, O Lamb of God, only if they've got lots of time to fill up. They weren't integral parts of the Mass. So the real bit, from a composer's point of view, for Latin Masses, the Kyrie and Gloria. So what do we make of Bach's B minor Mass? Well, the Kyrie and Gloria, he was trying to get a job from the Elector Saxony. He wasn't getting on very well with the authorities in Leipzig, and so he wrote a Kyrie and Gloria, a Missa Brevis, and sent the music off to the Elector of Saxony, who at the same time was becoming King of Poland. And becoming the King of Poland is much more interesting than finding a new cool composer, so he ignored Bach for years. The amazing thing is, though, that if you want somebody, well, imagine today, if you want somebody to appreciate a piece of music, you'd send them the score with everything on it. He sent the performing parts. There's no way you could look at one piece and see how it worked. You just got all the soprano part, over here, all the alto part, in another book, all the tenor part, and so on and so forth. So it's hardly surprising that it didn't get performed in his lifetime or by the Elector of Saxony, as far as we know. In the late 1740s, approaching the end of his life, he completed the Mass, the Credo, the Sanctus, Benedictus, and Agnus Dei, mainly again by rehashing old music. So that was something close to, you will find books that tell you how spiritual he wanted to become in his later life and how he was turning his eye towards heaven. God got secondhand music. So you can rehash what had happened before. The question is various things. You see, I've described the Missa Brevis and the Missa and the Mass of the Lutheran times, and of course, records aren't complete. And they may have been moving towards having sung Credo, Sanctus, Benedictus, and Agnus Dei in Leipzig towards the end of Bach's life, because Bach died in 1751. Sorry, in 1750. In 1750, you've all heard about Gottlob Hara, haven't you? Bach's successor. Now, the main thing about Gottlob Hara is he got the choir to perform Fuchs's Missa Canonica complete. So in 1751, they actually did a complete Mass, Kyrie Gloria, Credo Sanctus Benedictus Agnus Dei in St. Thomas's. So when Bach was doing the B minor Mass, he may have had those changes were going on around him, was trying to accommodate to it. But of course, the B minor Mass was far too long, even for a long Lutheran service. Anyway, Lutheranism and hymns or chorales. And I put the anism in brackets, but I go slightly beyond Luther's life in this little section. Here you've got two early Lutheran hymnals. The first one, the Etliche Christliche Lieder, some Christian songs, hymns of praise and psalms in accordance with the pure word of God, composed mainly from Holy Scripture by a number of highly learned men to sing in church, as is already to a certain degree being practiced in Wittenberg. And it's possible that Luther didn't oversee the production of this book. It had 8 hymns in it, but a lot of the things included in it were taken from broadsheets, single chorale and word settings, which he had published, and then the Enchiridion, an Enchiridion or little handbook for every Christian, very useful to keep at hand from continuous practice and contemplation of spiritual songs and psalms, honestly and artfully translated to German. So this is what you might say the start of the German Lutheran chorale. And a page looks something like this. Here's one of the 8 which occurred in the first book I mentioned. It's the tune is possibly by Luther himself, and some of you may recognize it. But they weren't content just to write their own tunes and write their own words. There was a desperate need for suitable hymns, and they started looking about and seeing what sort of material could be used and turned to the use of the Lutheran Mass. Now you've got here in front of you, it's a manuscript, and it's the start of the Easter sequence from the Latin Mass. The Easter sequence was sung on Easter Sunday between the ordinary readings and between the Gloria. And I'm going to try and get my focus in for this. Victimi Pascali laudes immolet Christiani. Fair enough for the Latin Mass. The next bit will raise some eyes. Christus der Standen, la da 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 da. And so they're introduced into the Catholic sequence, as it was called, is one of the medieval Latin church hymns, because although we associate Martin Luther with putting everything into German, there was a tradition in Germany, different from the rest of the Catholic Church, of singing vernacular hymns on high days and holy days. And this is one which was used on Easter Day. And if you use the hymn like this, you had to link it in some way with the liturgy, and you see it ends up with Kyrie eleison, the Kyrie eleison. So you use that hymn, and if it ends up Kyrie eleison, God have mercy, it could be used in place of that part of the Mass. In fact, what I haven't done for you is pick out the actual German tune. There you are, in brackets. Those of you who in your time have become English people who've become German organists or have played for German churches are very surprised at Easter because you have this tremendous rousing hymn, Christ is risen, Lord have mercy. And it seems such a contrast because when I came to that conflict within myself, I didn't understand the position that that hymn had in the German Mass well before Luther's time, going back to 1300. The melody is this. Other sources of Lutheran hymns was to adapt plain song melodies and plain song words. You take the melodies which had been sung during the Mass in Roman Catholic time, translate the words, put them into verse meter, and adapt the melody to make it into a sort of hymn tune rather than some flowing piece of plain song. And here you're going to see, first of all, the Et in terra Pax from a plain song Gloria, and then the Allein Gott, which is the metrical version of the Gloria, with German. And you notice the similarity of the melody, and you also, if you know both Latin and German, you'll see the similarity of the words. I hope it's going to come out. And there you've got a close-up coming up. These are the ones adapted. I can't quite see where you see a close-up there of the keyboard. You see a close-up of the keyboard, and you see it's a much better representation than one we saw earlier. Other sources of German hymns. Brand new texts and melodies. Da 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 da. Ein Festburg, melody by Luther. Words by Luther. Those of you who grew up grinding through da 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 will notice how lively the rhythms were back in Luther's day. If you're lucky.
Ein fester Burg ist unser Gott, ein guter Wehr und Waffen.
And as you all know, the old thing that Luther said, why should the devil have the best tunes? They went for a wholesale reuse of existing melodies. You may think I have got that out of centre, but how many of you are acquainted with this particular, yes? Well, you were here when I included this in my other talk 6 years ago, but it's part, yes. Alisa Vita by Giovanni Giacomo Gastaldi, a bouncy dance tune with words from Italy. That shows you the sort of material we're dealing with. Well, if you're Italian, you'd have got drunken sauces to that music. There's Luther preaching. Become India is Freude. In you is joy. And I know I'm concentrating big on this, but a lot of you know this already, but out there'll be some people, some English people watching this who don't know the background to some of the chorales they sing. So I've widened the brief a little bit here. For those of you out here, if I haven't managed to actually break the connection now, you might get a chance to ask questions later. Oh, Haupt voll Blut und Wunden. This is possibly the most well-known and most used in the English churches and American churches of the German chorales. You'll all know it when you hear it. The early Lutherans weren't going to let that tune by Hans Leo Hassler get away from them. But where did it originally start? Well, you can see by the picture, there's a certain dislocation of mood, isn't there? Because it started like this.
Mein Gemüt ist mir verwehret, das macht ein Jungfrau zart, bin ganz und gar verehret, mein Herz.
So it really was a case, any tune, which was a good tune, could be used during the Lutheran services. If there was any choir music based on these chorale tunes, it was distinctly unfriendly for the. For those who don't read music, I've had to put music samples in here. All these 4 lines are sung at the same time: sopranos, altos, tenors, and basses. And in all our hymn tunes these days, the melody's in the top line, the other parts accompany. When Walter, you remember I mentioned him as somebody cooperated with Luther, he did the arrangements a bit like some of the plain song masses of the Catholics at the time, with the melody in the middle part. There you can see it. La da la da la da 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 da. Overall effect, jolly good choir music, but no hope for congregations. Bach and the hymns and chorales. There you can see the front page of the Neue Leipziger Gesangbuch. We'll be coming back to that. But some of Bach's earliest compositions were chorale based. This one here is probably actually an accompaniment to a hymn. And here you've got both lines, your right hand and the left hand, and pedals of the organist. There's the line of the hymn. It's Allein Gott again. La da dee da 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 dee dee dee. And as was common in 18th century Germany, a little interlude between the lines and then the next line. And he would have written this quite probably when he was very young. When I say very young, not in nappies, but mid-teens. And when Bach was organist at Arnstadt, he got a month's leave to go to Lübeck to study and listen to Buxtehude, stayed there 4 months, got severely reprimanded, learned a lot of Buxtehude, and was also reprimanded not only for staying away a long time, but also for introducing strange harmonies. You can see these great fat chords there of going from one sort of discord to another. There's your little interludes in the middle. The overall effect is something like this. The congregations were said to be totally thrown off course. and not mislead you. And what I've given you there is the textbook account. But there's the I'll give you the textbook thing. Okay, there is no manuscript of this by Bach. The earliest manuscript is by Johann Peter Kellner from 1725, when Bach was 40. And this bit, these bits around here, look like mature Bach, could well be Bach. These bits, which I've just been saying was Bach playing all the awful discords, are ham-fisted in the way they are composed. So there's no proof that what Johann Peter Kellner wrote out was a bit of Bach, and then he changed bits himself, because the early bars of this are so mature, and the late bars, which are sort of towards the end of the first line, are like some clumsy kid writing it out. So the textbook may not be true. Anyway, still with early Bach, Theme and Variations by Christer du bist der helle Tag. Here again, this is said to be early Bach because you've got great clumps of notes, all these very badly written, and also theme and variations on chorales, often written by Johann Böhm, no, Georg Böhm, who was at St. John's Church in, wait now, can't think where it was. St. John's Church in can't think what it, total blank, never mind. I'll come back to, because I'll come back to this later. Okay. It was St. John's Church, and they say, well, Bach was a chorister in the same sort of place at that time, and so he would have learnt from him. And so that's why it's dated early on, because Georg Böhm was writing variation, Bach was in the same city. They say this is early Bach because all these chords are great fat chords, where here, you see a bit of writing by Bach, which is mature, and it's much more 4 parts, much neater, much more like a mature composing group. But in these sets of variations, you get grand, glorious music. And you get pretty little music. For some reason, it didn't come up. So I'm going to go back and find what happened to that. So we've got a second clip. And I didn't, never mind. There's a pretty little bit of music in that. And there's also another burp in that, a pawing and a burp, because that manuscript is not in Bach's hand. It was written sometime in the first half of the 18th century. It could be as late as 1749. And it's dated to be an early Bach because of the clumsy first movement, because Bach was in the same city as, I'm doing badly today, I just can't remember names, as Böhm. But apart from that clumsy introduction, all the variations are written in very mature counterpoint. And there's no proof that somebody around about 1738, some student didn't take the sets of variations and put in their own hand, they copy out the variations and also copy out their own harmonization of the main tune, and they weren't very good at it. Anyway, Bach's use of chorales in choral works by Bach. And we're going to look at one in particular, it's the chorale cantata, Wachet auf und die Stimme. Because of all of Bach's chorales, 40 or so of them, 200 chorales in total, 40 of them make use of German chorales. So here's a tune you may know. principal movements of this work. He starts off, oh yes, by the way, English organists out there, what season do you associate this with? Where am I on camera? There. English organists out there, what season do you associate this with? I can't hear you, but you're all saying Advent. Wrong. Bach wrote this for the last Sunday, the 27th Sunday of Trinity. It's not for Bach and for the Germans a particularly Advent hymn. It wasn't an Advent cantata. It was the last Sunday in Trinity. It so happens you only get 27 Sundays in Trinity when Easter is very early. And the general feel of it is Adventy, but if you want to be nitpicky, it is not an Advent cantata. Anyway, and in fact, it's only performed once in Bach's lifetime because these events were so rare, 27th Sunday after Trinity, and he wrote other themes. Anyway, he starts off with an orchestral introduction. Goes on sometimes because these cantatas would last 20 minutes, 25 minutes, half an hour. Just a bit of extra music in the service. No way of getting through a service in an hour as Luther wanted. Eventually, the choir comes in with the chorale tune at the top in long notes and accompanying voices. Go to the middle movement of this. Once again, it's based around that chorale tune. It's also probably one of the most famous melodies which Bach wrote. It became famous because it was used for a certain advertisement. But he introduces the melody and his new melody, one of the few good tunes that Bach wrote. He was wonderful at compositional construction, doesn't produce many hummable tunes, and then the chorale melody is introduced. And the last movement of cantata is the choir sings the whole thing in hymn tune style. But apart from that sort of what I'd call tectonic constructional approach, Bach was very concerned about matching the music to the words. So we're going to have a look at this cantata. And you can read for yourselves which one it is up there. For those of you who don't read music, here you've got the soprano and alto parts on the top, the tenor and bass parts there. Both these lines are sung at the same time. And the top line is the chorale melody, the hymn tune melody. This setting here, in front of your eyes, is mainly Bach, but not all. Because what I have done, I have taken the Bach genius out of it. You've got this. If you're lucky. Patch constructed in sound. So that is good Bach chorale start writing, but the completion of that was done by a third-rate anonymous person, me. So I'm just going to carry it to the next slide. Now, remind you, this once again is the wrong version. This is the common version, my version at the end. Now we're going to have Bach. So things you'll notice, for instance, is on this word here, change my glasses, I'm listing up. Argon, bad, evil. He uses a chord known as a diminished seventh. That's a chord that's got no key. Bach lived in a time when they loved writing in major and minor keys. Argon has no key at all. That chord there, it's a chord used later by Liszt and also silent film companies to show drama and something wonderful or rather unpleasant going on. So for bad or evil, he uses a diminished seventh chord. And also the first part, as you can see, talks about the purity of the word. And when we get to about here, the whole thing changes down to about the evil generation. And that chord there, to that chord there, D major to A flat major, you cannot get further apart in our modern key system. Here are the bass notes. In fact, I think yes, here's Argon maybe. I'm not reading my notes properly. Here's Argon, it's called. Here we are. Evil. Hear that again? It's unresolved and isn't in sort of a nice, safe major minor system. Going from there to there, you've got chords which are very far apart. You're going to hear the two root notes, the most important notes in the chord, one after the other. Equally unlike, you cannot get more unrelated in the major minor system than that. The shift from purity to evilness. And the chords themselves sound like this. Now you might be sitting there thinking, oh yeah, so what? Not that great. But you have got 300 years of musical development to refer to. You've had all the Romantic period, all the modern period, everything else. From Bach's time, which hadn't got Haydn, hadn't got Mozart, hadn't got Liszt, hadn't got Brahms, hadn't got Wagner, hadn't got Stravinsky, those chords made much more of an emotional impact. Here's Herzlieb's to Jesu, movement 3 from the Matthew Passion. This is all Bach, and it's a good, solid Bach harmonization. But later on, when you get to movement 55, you can see the English translation under the German. I'm with glasses here. They're still not working. Let's try this pair. Oh, wondrous love. And so the idea of wondrous is induced by having lots of little chromatic notes. So it's not just a stay in one simple key like the one I just played for you. It shifts through the keys. And then when we get to Strafe, punishment, you hear once again this diminished seventh chord, a chord which in Bach's time had great emotional intensity. Just to make sure you get the full benefit of how wunderbarlich the chords are at the beginning, hear it in slowly. Wait, 3 minutes past 7 on my watch. We started a bit late, and I'm going to career on to the end, which may be in 10 minutes or so. If you want to go now or disconnect, if you're out there, I won't feel offended. But this is the first time I've given this talk. I was commissioned by the Friends here at St George's. I haven't had a chance to bed down, so I don't know how much not to blather. Anyway, organ chorale preludes. Bach wrote about 300 organ works, 200 of which are based on chorales. And they were not just pretty pieces, they were integrated into the liturgy, and the introduction to hymns of chorales was often with an organ piece. Here's a modern example. How it goes. That's a modern example where they've gone back to trying to get services down to an hour, because modern people don't like sitting 4 hours or 5 hours on a Sunday morning. Bach's organ chorales could be only 1 minute long. They could last up to 8 or 9 minutes. But often he tried to interpret the words. So we're going to look at Nun kommt der Heiden Heiland again, with a text by Martin Luther. The melodies adapted from plain chant. Now there's two ways of looking at this. Either you can imagine these words, which are often translated, "Come now, Saviour of the world," or "Now come, Saviour of heathens." That's various translations of it. It can either be a single person, very carefully praying, full of anguish, or it can be thinking about the glorious second coming of Christ appearing in glory. So the first setting, he tries to interpret the music if it's the single sinner praying. And it's a very ornamented melody, lots of extra notes put in to be expressive, and it almost destroys where the melody is. You can't really hear it. This is Bach's prayerful meditative version. Please come, Lord, of a prayer. Here's Christ coming in glory at the day of Revelation. What about Bach and bread and butter chorales, i.e. the common chorale scene on Sundays? Well, every Sunday at the same time, Bach had to field 4 choirs in 4 different churches. Each choir had to have at least 8 voices in it. And his main choir did his cantata, you see, a motet, that's back to the motet book, and it sang chorales. The second choir, the less skilled singers, did a simple cantata by another composer. Motets weren't difficult, and chorales. The third choir, getting down the pecking order, was only allowed to sing a motet and chorales. And the fourth order, which went to St. Peter's, just sung chorales. I weren't competent for anything more than that, but chorale singing was the bread and butter work of the German choir in the church under Bach's time. Yep. And it's I cannot guarantee this. It seems very good to use this Neue Leipziger Gesangbuch, which had all the main German hymns in it and the music. And you see the example there. We'll see the sample in a minute. You see that was 1682. At the very top, I don't know what I can do about that because I don't want to fight with the technology this late on in the talk. But I don't know why that's appeared. But you've got there the cantors, the soprano, the alto, and the tenor and the bass, which means, although it's muddly looking, you could actually play from this. But some people say that in certain circumstances, the chorales were sung unaccompanied. Well, here on the bass line, you've got little signs which tell the accompanist what chords to use. Didn't have to read all the muddle above it. He just read those signs. He knew what the chords were to accompany the singing. Here's another version from the same hymn book. And you see that is the cantors, the soprano part, and then the alto part's published after it or printed after it. So there's no way somebody could play 4 parts from that like a modern hymn book, but the bass part would have had symbols which would have told an accompanist what to do. So it's far from certain whether the chorales were all accompanied or were unaccompanied. It's out, as you might say, for the jury on that. But the thing, what did Bach think of the bread and butter chorales? Well, obviously, as a good Lutheran, he used them in his works, his organ works, and also in his choral works we've seen. But at Arnstadt, his first job, he complained because he was having to do more chorale work than any other sort of music. And he thought his status, his genius, was not properly used on chorales. So he complained. He wanted to do more complicated. Chorales weren't enough for him. In Leipzig, he was reprimanded because he had to take the choir out to sing at weddings and funerals. And if the only music was chorales, he wouldn't go along. He'd send a deputy to do it, so he's reprimanded for that. And then in the masses we looked at, after the cantata, if there's nothing else fancy, after the cantata, most of his music chorale, he used to push off, disappear, leave it with a deputy to carry on. So although in the artistic sense, he was sort of very keen on the chorales, in the practical sense and where is my dignity as a genius of me as J.S. Bach, he wasn't that concerned about them, wasn't going to hang about. But for Bach, there wasn't this strong tie between words and music. The music could be used in many a variety of emotions and texts, as this from Christmas Oratorio shows you. We think of that as the Passion Chorale. Da, 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 da. There it is, the grand and glorious conclusion of the Christmas Oratorio. The Lutheran Church and Bach afterwards. This is, of course, all conjecture. It's easy to sort of recall what happened from 1517 up to 1750. After that, it's what's known as alternative history, guesswork. But the tradition of using little pieces of music and organ music quite a lot as part of the liturgy carried on. It was lost in other church traditions. It was maintained in the Lutheran Church. They've got up there, this is a piece of Hugo Disler from 1942. We have moved to something here. 1942. That is 80 years ago coming on. Here we are, 2008. Little chorale introductions and accompanying parts. And some of you will recognise this tune. For the English organists out there, this is what they would have played. This is designed to be played before the hymn is sung, absolutely in the Bach tradition. Bach could have met with Gail Bohm, Lüneburg. Let's come back. Also, another reason he may not have studied under him, Bach was at St Michael's, Lüneburg. Gail Bohm was directing music at St John's, Lüneburg, and like all good Christians, they didn't get on, didn't talk to each other. But coming back to post-Bach, here's another set of a similar sort of thing, pieces written to be played before the hymns in the Lutheran church. And here's a fairly innocuous tune. La da 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 da. And those of you who read music will see from this there's an awful lot of notes. And it's in a very modern style. So even if all this cluster doesn't mean anything to you, this is the sort of thing which is introduced to him, published. It's not just an organist going wild. Publishers have taken the time to print this and put it on sale in music shops, be played in services before hymns. Similar to the German church. In an English church, I carried on my Norwegian, Lutheran, Germanic traditions and did introductions to hymns like that. I was reprimanded pretty smartly. But of course, you've also got the fame of Bach carries on. So there you've got the choir of St Thomas's Leipzig, the Thomaner Chor. And there you've got down here, you've got Gotthold Schwarz, who used to be the director of music, and now it's Andreas Reitzer. Bach archive. So the fact Bach was a genius and so famous has had huge impacts on the formation of choirs and the music they sing. For instance, why in Leipzig is there not a Johann Kuhnau archive? After all, he was Bach's immediate predecessor, but he didn't have the same impact, but Bach has had that impact. Moving on from Germany, you see that's the Holy Trinity Evangelical Church in New York. And here's a clip right up to date. This is Easter Sunday morning this year, 17th of April, 2022, at the end of the service. Does it sound reminiscent?
Bless and preserve us. Amen.
that could have been 300 years earlier. That could have been a Bach's time. And in the afternoon in that New York church, they performed the Bach's Christmas or Easter oratorio. So still in the Lutheran churches, the music of Bach is a very important part of their tradition. And for instance, St. Anne's Lutheran Church in London, this is a sort of universal Lutheran, but that's where you will find the City Bach Collective, which once a month performs Bach cantatas in a liturgical setting. Here we are in Sweden, Maria Church in Sweden, the start of the service in last Advent, and although it's rather constrained, you can still see that Bachian influence. I think it's because of, and I can't prove this, I think because of Bach's influence, the effect, the use, the understanding of the chorales in the German Lutheran tradition is much stronger than the position of hymn tunes in the, I call the Anglican Church or the Catholic Church or American churches. Hymn tunes are hymn tunes are hymn tunes in these other churches. They've almost got some spiritual connections, some extra spiritual feeling within the German Lutheran Church, possibly because of the Bach influence. In fact, the German chorales in the German Lutheran Church have almost got that aura of spirituality which Gregorian chant has in the Catholic Church. And I don't think it hadn't been for Bach's influence and for that aura of spirituality which is thrown up, that you'd get anything like this based around an English hymn tune. That's it, 20-minute overrun, only 15 minutes really, because we started a bit late as we wrestled with the technology. But thank you very much. Any questions I might be able to ask?
Thank you very much.
We're changing places now.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you very much for that very.
Yeah, that's going to be a technical fiddle about, so we'll just carry on.
Yeah, I don't say very lively, thorough, and entertaining. So thank you very much. It could probably be said that Lutheranism owes a great deal to J.S. Bach, probably more than any other religion owes to any single artist associated with it. So, we are overrun a little bit. Does anyone have a question they'd like to put to Philip now?
They play Bach, but it's sort of a... Oh yes, is Bach played in Catholic churches? Is that it? Yes, it is, of course, because he is now acknowledged to be a great composer. But it is not part and parcel of the Catholic Church and their tradition as it is for German Lutherans. The Catholic Church has, over sort of the last few centuries, particularly in the last century or so, it has become much more liberal and is more willing to admit the music of non-Catholic composers. But it certainly hasn't got that same titanic position as it has in the Lutheran Church. And the question was, because in that picture I showed from 1539 or thereabouts, Lutheran service, and incense and so on and so forth, did they still believe in transubstantiation? This is a theological question, and I'm a second-class musician, I don't know. Anything else? Yeah? That, of course, was based on Nun kommt der Heiden heilen. I can't tell you more than that because I found it on my hard disk, which means I saved it years ago, but didn't actually record where I saved it from. I thought, that clinches it, but I don't know where it comes from. Oh. Yes, it comes in English. Yes, and also that particular tune is used in the English hymnal, but certainly in the 1906 edition or thereabouts, I think it comes in Lent rather than in Advent. But there again, we saw from Bach's use, the tunes were very fluid about where they could be used.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you especially to Philip for that engaging and enlightening talk. You here in live Georges are now invited for refreshments at the back of the church, which I'm afraid people on Zoom won't get. However, what I will say is that in 1 month's time, the next talk, June the 3rd Tuesday, whichever that is. Thank you, Sonny. 21st of June, the next talk will be the former chairperson of the Spitalfields Trust, talking to us about the history of the Spitalfields preservation movement, which promises to be as enlightening and as entertaining, I hope, as Philip has been this evening. So we look forward to that. That will be Oliver Lee Wood speaking to us in 1 month's time. But for now, that brings this evening to a close. And once again, to Philip Norman.
Thanks very much. And thank you, anybody who's still out there, but I can't see any.
Thank you. Superb.
Okay, thank you.